Bible is full of stories that we all know and love. But how well do we know them? The answer might surprise you. The Bible you thought you knew is going to dive deep into the exquisite details of the biblical stories that make them fascinating and transforming. In last week's podcast, we dealt with a story that featured Elijah's departure and Elisha's taking over in Elijah's place. Even at the metaphorical level, the imagery describing Elijah's exit is spectacular, to say the least. A whirlwind is at least imaginable, but a chariot and horses of fire is much harder to imagine. Right after Elijah left in this dramatic display, Elisha used his mentor's mantle to perform his first miracle by dividing the waters of the Jordan River and turning brackish water into sweet water in Jericho. At that point, we encounter Elisha in an even more incredible story. Again, even at the metaphorical level, the episode borders on the absurd. Here is the story in a nutshell, and it is found in 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 23 through 25. The episode starts by informing us that Elisha was on the way to Bethel when he ran into a group of small boys coming out of the city. They began to taunt the prophet by shouting, twice as it happens, "Go up, Baldy! Go up, Baldy!" That's in verse 23. Elisha turned around, and when he saw what the boys were doing, he responded by cursing them in the Lord's name. Though the nature of the curse is not mentioned, what occurred next beggars the imagination. Right after Elisha's curse, two she-bears emerged from the nearby woods. These bears tore into the boys, at which point we are amazed to learn that there were 42 who had jeered at Elisha. That's in verse 24. The results of the bear attack are not specified, apparently leaving the scene to our imagination. Immediately after the bear attack, Elisha went to Mount Carmel and thereafter returned to Samaria. That's in verse 25. Saying that this episode is strange understates the matter. Elisha's not being amused about being made fun of because he was bald is understandable, and even the curse, "God damn you boys," is within the realm of a response that one might expect. Perhaps we might have wished that Elisha would have been less sensitive or been content to dress down the boys for extremely bad manners. But maybe Elisha was having a bad day, had not slept well, was still dealing with Elijah's departure, or was simply a grumpy prophet. That may explain Elisha's behavior in the incident, but what do we make of the bear attack? Just as soon as Elisha cursed the kids, two she-bears at that very moment came out of the woods. That is either a remarkable coincidence or is the narrator's way of informing us about the nature of the prophet's curse and the prophet's power. Then the bears go after the boys, at which point we find out that there were 42 of them. This scene is difficult to reconstruct. 42 small boys from the city spot Elisha and say, evidently in unison, "Go up, Baldy, go up, Baldy," after which they are assaulted by two female bears. I am guessing that you have never heard a sermon based on that text. A story like this may, in the final analysis, defy interpretation. At the same time, as we try to deal with this odd story, there are a couple of items to keep in mind. First, no moralistic interpretation will pass muster. What moral could the episode possibly teach? Can you imagine a Sunday school class where you warn the boys in the class not to make fun of bald-headed prophets in the presence of she-bears? It would not be much of an improvement to admonish boys and girls not to make fun of bald people or not make fun of anyone for any reason, especially when one is near woods. A moralistic approach seldom works in biblical material, which is certainly true in this instance. Let's see whether the details help us at all. Starting with the kids who scoffed Elisha, who scoffed Elisha. Typically, Na'arim means young man, with the age not being defined. A little young man, which is what the Hebrew says, suggests obviously someone younger, a boy, again without the specific age being described. Later on, these little young men are called yuladim, or children. Are these descriptors suggestive of age or something else? We'll return to that question. Also, what these kids say is interesting. Going up is a common way of designating going to the temple. Would it be insulting to tell a prophet to, in effect, go to the temple? It would not be insulting, but that is not all they said. They also mentioned the fact that Elisha was bald. Now, in our culture, baldness may be a stigma, but it is not a religious stigma. Being bald may suggest being unattractive or not having sex appeal or being or getting older and the like, but it is not a religious slur of any kind. In the biblical world, however, baldness had to do with more than the way that one looked. In Leviticus, for example, a person who has lost his hair is, of course, bald, but, the text points out, is still clean. That's in Leviticus chapter 13, verse 40. Clean here does not refer to hygiene, but to ritual cleanliness. That is, if one is ritually unclean, one cannot participate in worship and certainly could not enter the temple. The Leviticus passage makes it clear that baldness in and of itself does not render a person unclean and therefore unfit for worship. Just in case one is unclean, then there are various procedures that have to be put into effect to become ritually clean. Apparently, the kids mocking Elisha simply assumed that his baldness meant that he would be eventually stopped from, quote-unquote, going up to the temple. In other words, they were not merely making fun of his appearance, but saying dark things about his ability to enter the temple. The kids accusing Elisha of being potentially ritually unclean and taunting him twice may explain Elisha's harsh response. After all, what kind of a prophet would he be were he ritually unclean and was not doing anything about that condition? All of a sudden, his cursing the little young men may not seem all that rash. This was not something in the category of boys being boys, but something a little more sinister. What about the bears? And why female bears? In the ancient world, did she-bears, that is, mama bears, have the same reputation as they have today? Mama bears have a reputation for being fierce, especially when protecting cubs. Of course, these bears are not said to be protecting cubs, but maybe the fierceness of female bears is being communicated. At the same time, it seems odd ursine behavior for two females to attack in tandem. Does that suggest behavior that is unbear-like? That is, are we supposed to take the bear attack not as something natural, so to speak, but unnatural, at least as far as normal bear behavior is concerned. That is, was a tandem attack from two female bears due to Elisha's curse. We cannot say for sure, but the possibility is tantalizing. As bizarre as this story is, the number of the children, that is what they are called when the bears attack, is astounding. There are 42 of them. It would not be difficult to imagine boys, impish, mischievous, full of themselves, to find it amusing to make fun of a bald-headed man. But when one thinks of boys playing around, looking to get into trouble, going out of their way to misbehave, one thinks of a smallish group, 4 or 5, maybe 6 or 7. But 42? A group that large makes little sense. 42 would require some form of organization, some leadership, and the like. 42 children sounds like a completely artificial number. The attack itself seems artificial. Literally, the she-bears tore 42 of the children, quote unquote. First off, this makes it sound as though there were more than 42, even though only 42 bore the brunt of the attack. Secondly, there were only 2 bears attacking 42 children. Did the children stand in line? Did they wait until Ehud and Levi get mauled and then Elkanah and Sheba stepped up to take their own medicine after patiently waiting their turn? Would not the boys have run when they saw the bears? To be sure, not all could have escaped, but many could have. 2 bears could not handle 42 scared children all at once. Again, there is an aspect of artificiality to this scene. One thing we have not mentioned is that this event took place in Bethel. Bethel was an infamous town. This was one of the towns that Jeroboam placed golden calves in after Israel split into 2 realms, Judah and Israel. King Jeroboam equated these golden calves with the Israelite deity, thus imitating the golden calf that Aaron had made for the people in the wilderness. Quite specifically, we were told that the little young men had come out of the city, namely Bethel. Does this sight make the boys' slander more egregious? These boys had come out of a city well known for its idolatry and then suggested that Elisha's bald head made him unfit for the temple. In this case, outrageous idolatry is made the moral equivalent to being ritually unclean for reasons over which one has no control. Of course, this is the second time Elisha has been in or near Bethel. The first time he was accompanying Elijah when the sons of the prophets had come out to ask him whether he knew that his mentor was about to depart. That's in verse 3 of chapter 2 of 2 Kings. This time around, prophets did not come out of the city, but little young men, posing not a question, but offering a religious slur. Bethel continues to have a mixed reputation. One more thing is worth mentioning. In the large narrative complex in which this story is embedded, young men and children sometimes have nothing to do with age. Famously, when Rehoboam was considering whether to modify Solomon's harsh policies, he consulted Zukanim, elders, and children, Yuladim. Translators typically soften the Hebrew by translating children in that context, young men. But the Hebrew is not ambiguous. Yuladim advised Rehoboam, children. Their advice was terrible. They told Rehoboam to tell the people that he would make his father's policies even worse. That led to the great schism from which Israel never recovered Children in this case had nothing to do with age, but stupidity, impulsiveness, pettiness, and the like. Evidently, children of that ilk were not confined to Rehoboam's inner circle or to Shechem. Bethel had such children around as well. In this instance, there were at least 42 of them. This story, like the one that preceded it featuring Elijah's amazing departure, is replete with elements that the narration itself wants us to see as metaphorical. But metaphors are great transmitters of truth. The great Elijah left this world in a manner that could only be described in fantastic terms. He bequeathed his prophetic prowess to Elisha, who also had a flair for the miraculous. As well as with any prophet, he could be both blessing and bane. The little young men experienced the latter. Literally speaking, there may not be any she-bears lurking in the woods ready to pounce when a prophet is insulted. Still, prophetic prowess is never to be underestimated. You know the drill. Go to my website, faspina.com. Let me know what your email is so that I'll contact you when the time is ripe. Also, if you want to have me answer questions on a Q&A session, email me at fspina106@gmail.com. I want to thank you so very much for listening to The Bible You Thought You Knew. I have a question for you. Do you have a question or topic that you'd like me to cover on the podcast? If so, all you need to do is head over to Apple Podcasts and do two simple things. One, leave a rating and review telling me what you think of the podcast. Two, in that review, ask anything you want related to the Bible. That's all you have to do. Then, listen in to hear your question answered on a future episode. Join us next time on The Bible You Thought You Knew when we discuss Jesus' personal Bible. God bless.